If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be working at an adult store, I would have laughed them out of the room. Me, the guy who once blushed just passing by the lingerie aisle at Target, standing behind a counter surrounded by neon boxes promising endless pleasure? Not likely. But there I was, one hand gripping the strap of my backpack, the other wiping away the sweat gathering at my temple as I pushed open the glass door of Pleasure Avenue. A little silver bell chimed above me, announcing my arrival like I just stepped onto a stage. And in a way I had. The scent hit first. A mix of new plastic, faint leather, and something sweetly artificial, like strawberry lip gloss. The walls were painted a warm maroon, the kind of color that made you feel like you'd stepped inside a secret. Rows of neatly arranged shelves gleamed under soft track lights, displaying everything from massage oils to novelty mugs with slogans that made my inner prude want to hide under the counter. Behind one of those counters stood John, my new boss, mid-30s, tall, effortlessly confident in a way I could never fake. He had the kind of smile that didn't need permission to happen. "There he is," he said, grinning as I walked in. "Our new hero. Ready for your first day in the kingdom of curiosity." I chuckled awkwardly. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good attitude," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Just remember, this isn't as wild as people imagine. Most customers are just regular folks. Couples looking to reconnect, nervous guys shopping for anniversaries, women buying gifts for bachelorette parties. Half of it's about making people feel comfortable." That helped. A little. He started walking me through the store, pointing out sections with the enthusiasm of a tour guide. "This wall's all apparel, lingerie, costumes, and yes, that's a real leather section. The middle shelves are health products. And over here, the toys. Don't worry, they don't bite." I laughed at that, though my eyes widened at the sheer variety. I'd never seen so many shapes, colors, and possibilities. John caught my expression and smirked. "Yeah, it's a lot at first. You get used to it. We all do." He paused, studying me. "You okay?" "I think so. Just taking it all in," I said honestly. "I mean, it's not every day you start a job where half the inventory can blush you into silence." He laughed, full and easy. "You'll fit in fine." We finished the tour, and he handed me a small set of silver keys. "Here, these are for the displays and the register. You'll open up alone this morning. I've got a supplier meeting, but I'll be back around noon. Think you can handle a few hours of solitude?" I took the keys carefully, like they were holy relics. "Yeah, I can do that." His grin widened. "Good man. Remember, confidence, humor, and no judgment. People sense that faster than anything else." Then, with a wink that made me both laugh and panic, he added, "Oh, and try not to fall in love with the customers. Complicates inventory." "Right," I said, cheeks warming. "I'll do my best." He left with a wave, and the bell over the door jingled again. Suddenly, the store felt too quiet. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, joined by the faint mechanical buzz of a display model running on loop somewhere near the back wall. It wasn't loud, just enough to remind me that everything around me had a pulse, even the merchandise. I stood there for a moment, the key ring cold in my hand, trying to ground myself. This job wasn't supposed to be funny, or embarrassing, or overwhelming. It was supposed to be freeing. I'd spent too many years working in places where I had to wear invisible armor. Restaurants, call centers, offices with laminated posters about team synergy. Every time someone made a crude joke or asked if I had a girlfriend, I'd just smile tightly and say, "Not right now," like it was a minor inconvenience instead of a lie. Here, though, no one cared about pretending. John didn't ask who I dated. He just asked if I could handle the register and treat customers like humans. That alone made this job feel different. Not about selling adult toys, but about finally dropping the mask. I walked around the aisles again, this time slower, noticing details I'd missed earlier. The way the spotlights reflected off glossy boxes. The way each shelf label was printed in friendly, unashamed fonts. 4 couples. Self-care. Confidence boosters. Confidence. That was the word. I stopped at a display of colorful bottles and ran my fingers over one of the labels. The packaging read, "Comfort in your own skin." Maybe it was just marketing fluff, but it hit harder than it should have. Somewhere deep inside, I realized I wasn't just learning how to use a cash register. I was trying to learn how to be comfortable in my own skin too. I set my backpack down behind the counter and took a deep breath. The air smelled faintly like vanilla candles and a hint of leather from the back wall. Not unpleasant, just bold. A small mirror near the counter caught my reflection. I looked nervous but determined. A mix of "I can do this" and "please, universe, don't send me weirdos." The clock above the door ticked softly. It was 9:42 a.m. Time to get to work. I straightened a few boxes on the shelves, adjusted the lighting under the front display, and wiped down the counter. My hands moved automatically, but my thoughts wandered, wondering who would walk in first. Would it be a shy couple pretending to browse? A regular with too much confidence? Or maybe someone like me, nervous but curious, trying to figure out what they're really looking for? I smiled at the thought. My reflection caught my eye again, and I leaned against the counter, the keys jingling lightly from my belt loop. It was quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat, the kind of quiet that makes you overthink. That's when I realized I wasn't nervous anymore. I was excited, not because of the store itself, but because this felt like the first job where I didn't have to shrink to fit in. I could breathe here. I could talk freely. I could laugh without worrying about what it sounded like. I could just be. Somewhere beyond the tinted windows, a car passed. The sun hit the glass just right, casting a soft amber glow over the floor. Dust particles floated lazily in the light, like a curtain rising on the first act. I smiled, running a hand through my hair and whispering under my breath, "All right, showtime." The bell over the door jingled again, or maybe I just imagined it, hearing it in anticipation. I looked toward the entrance, waiting, half hoping. Silence. Just me and the quiet hum of the store. I chuckled softly and went back to rearranging a stack of boxes, shaking my head at my own nerves. Still, I couldn't help whispering one last plea to the universe as I adjusted a crooked price tag near the counter. "Okay," I muttered, under my breath, smiling to myself. "First customer. Please let it be someone normal." The bell over the door jingled, slicing through the quiet like the first note of a song. I looked up from the counter, heart skipping before I even saw who it was. There's something about that sound, anticipation in 3 soft chimes. A man stepped inside, hesitating at the threshold as the door swung shut behind him. He looked mid-20s, maybe my age, his hair damp with sweat like he'd just jogged from the gym. He wore a loose hoodie and dark athletic pants, the kind people wear when they want to look casual but end up looking like they walked out of a fitness ad anyway. He glanced around, blinking at the bright colors and polished shelves like he'd just realized where he was. Hi," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "Hey there," I said, doing my best to sound like a seasoned professional, and not someone who'd only been on the job for an hour. "Welcome to Pleasure Avenue. Need help finding something specific?" He gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah, actually, I do. It's kind of a weird situation, though." I smiled. "Trust me. This place redefines weird situations." That got a real laugh, short, but genuine. He ran a hand through his hair and stepped closer, lowering his voice like we were conspiring. "So, my best friend's getting married, and her friends have decided I'm, entertainment for the bachelorette party." I blinked. "Entertainment as in?" He winced, embarrassed. "A dance. Like a funny strip routine thing. They said it's all a joke, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't want to show up looking like an idiot." He laughed again, rubbing the back of his neck. I could tell he was half dying of embarrassment, half trying to play it off. "That's actually kind of great," I said, suppressing a grin. "A noble mission. You're basically saving the party." "Yeah, right," he said, "saving it by making a fool of myself." I shook my head and came around the counter. "Come on. Let's find something that walks the line between funny and flattering. You don't need to be Magic Mike. Just Confident Mike." He smiled, following me toward the costume section. Confident Mike sounds like someone who knows what he's doing. I'm still panicking Mike. Well, I said, scanning the racks. Panicking Mike. Let's see if we can fix that. I started pulling a few items off hangers, a police shirt, a fireman vest, even a cowboy hat for good measure. The costumes looked more Halloween than scandalous, and I could see his relief when he realized that. He picked up the hat, turning it in his hands. Cowboy, huh? Classic choice, I said. Timeless. Plus, hats are great for hiding fear. He laughed again, the sound lighter now. Yeah. Maybe I'll distract them with the hat, so they don't notice everything else going wrong. Exactly. That's called strategy. For a while, we tossed ideas back and forth, construction worker, cop, fake rock star. Every time I tried to pitch something, he'd respond with an exaggerated eye roll or mock seriousness, and it became less about shopping and more about talking. He started to loosen up, cracking jokes about his lack of rhythm, confessing that his friends had dared him into this. The nervous energy between us melted into something comfortable, like we'd known each other longer than 15 minutes. You know, he said at one point, holding up a glittery bow tie, this might actually work. It'll blind them before they notice how bad my dance moves are. I grinned. Honestly, that's a valid tactic. No one remembers your rhythm if they're laughing too hard. Is that official store advice? Comes free with every purchase. He laughed again. That laugh was warm, textured, the kind that fills a room without trying. I noticed how his shoulders relaxed when he smiled. The tension he'd walked in with seemed to fall away, piece by piece. His cheeks were flushed from either the gym or the moment, maybe both. It struck me then how easy it was to talk to him, how rare it felt to share humor with a stranger without having to guard myself. Usually, my mind ran on two tracks, what I wanted to say and what I shouldn't say. But here I just said things, and he met me there every time. He picked up a simple black tank top from the rack and held it against himself. What about this? It's basic. I can pull this off, right? It's good, I said, pretending to study him critically, arms folded. Shows confidence without trying too hard. Maybe add jeans or shorts depending on how brave you're feeling. Shorts, definitely, he said with mock enthusiasm. I'm aiming for tragic but memorable. That's a bold artistic choice, I replied. Our eyes met briefly, and I caught the faintest smirk on his lips. It wasn't flirtation exactly, more like the shared thrill of two people realizing they're on the same wavelength. He cleared his throat and looked around. So, do people ever get nervous coming in here? All the time, I said. The first few minutes are always the worst. They think everyone's judging them for being curious. But then they realize no one cares, and it turns into this weirdly wholesome experience. Wholesome, huh? He said, smirking. Yeah, I said, smiling back. Wholesome with glitter. That got another laugh, soft but genuine. He gathered his picks, the cowboy hat, the black tank, and a pair of novelty sunglasses that were entirely too ridiculous, and followed me back to the counter. While I rang him up, the conversation stayed easy. He told me about his friend's wedding, about how she'd always been the wild one, how he got talked into things he swore he'd never do. The way he told stories was animated, full of expression. I found myself wanting to hear more just for the way he told them. When I handed him the bag, his fingers brushed mine. Just a quick, accidental touch. But I felt it anyway. Not the shock of electricity the movies like to exaggerate, but something quieter, awareness. He paused for a second, maybe feeling it too. Then he smiled. Thanks for not laughing at me. Are you kidding? You're my favorite customer so far, I said, immediately realizing how that sounded. I mean, you're the only one so far, but still. You've set a high bar. He laughed again, that same easy warmth returning. Good to know I'm winning at something today. He took the bag and glanced toward the door, but he didn't move right away. Do you work here every day? Most days, I said. It's new, but I'm kind of liking it so far. Good, he said, nodding slightly. You're good at it. You make it not awkward. I smiled, touched by that more than I expected to be. That's the job, professional unawkwardness. Guess I'll have to come back for lessons. he said lightly, and this time I couldn't help but laugh. He waved once and pushed the door open. The little bell chimed again, softer now, and then he was gone. The store felt quieter afterward, but not empty. The kind of quiet that hums with afterthoughts. I leaned against the counter, the ghost of his laughter still hanging in the air, and let out a long breath. It had been a simple interaction, just a customer, a conversation, some nervous humor. But something about it felt different. The way he looked at me without judgment. The way I forgot, even for a few minutes, to be self-conscious. I glanced at the shelves, the same ones that had made me blush earlier that morning, and realized they didn't seem intimidating anymore. Maybe it wasn't the store that felt different. Maybe it was me. I had just started wiping down the counter when the bell jingled again. For half a second my heart jumped, thinking it was another customer, but when I looked up, it was him again. The same gym clothes, the same hesitant half-smile, only now he looked a little more determined, like someone who'd talked himself into something on the walk back. "Hey," he said, setting the shopping bag on the counter. "You're probably going to think I'm ridiculous, but can I try this on here? Just to make sure it actually looks okay before I embarrass myself in front of 30 women with cell phones." I blinked, surprised but smiling. Yeah, sure. There's a small fitting area in the back. No mirrors on the ceiling, I promise." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Good, because that would be horrifying." I motioned for him to follow me down the narrow aisle between displays. My heart thudded somewhere between be cool and what is happening right now. The fitting room was small but clean. Muted gray walls, a single mirror, a wooden bench, and a faint citrus scent from the cleaner we used. I handed him the costume bag, trying to sound professional. "Here you go. Knock yourself out. There's a hook for your stuff." He took the bag, then paused at the curtain. "Okay, but full disclosure, I've never tried anything like this before. So if you hear tragic noises, just ignore them." I laughed. "No promises. I might have to check for casualties." He grinned and disappeared behind the curtain, leaving me alone with my own nerves. I hovered nearby, pretending to straighten a rack of robes while I tried not to imagine what was happening in there. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense. There was something lighter about it, more human. The kind of connection that sneaks up on you in small, ordinary moments. A few seconds later, his voice came through the curtain. "Okay, but like, how do people make this look good? I look like an action figure who lost his box." I stifled a laugh. "I'm sure it's not that bad." "Oh, it's worse," he said. Do I come out, or?" "Only if you want honest feedback," I said, teasing. The curtain shifted, and there he was, stepping out cautiously in the black tank top and cowboy hat. It wasn't ridiculous at all. It was charming in that unpolished, too-real way that makes people more human. He was barefoot, fidgeting with the hem of the shirt, clearly second-guessing everything. "See," he said, gesturing helplessly. "Tragic." "Not tragic," I said, trying not to sound too earnest. "You look fun, confident, like the kind of guy who'd laugh at himself while everyone else clapped." "Which is good," he said, glancing at the mirror, "because I will definitely be laughing at myself." He studied his reflection, adjusting the hat, turning a little. "You really think it's okay?" "It's more than okay," I said. "You'll be the highlight of that party." He chuckled. "That's terrifying." For a moment, neither of us spoke. He was still facing the mirror, and I was behind him, pretending to adjust a stack of folded shirts just to have something to do. The silence didn't feel awkward, though. It felt present, like the air itself had slowed down. He caught my reflection behind him and smiled. "You know, I expected this to be way more awkward." "Same," I admitted. Usually when I meet someone in gym clothes and cowboy accessories, there's at least a story to go with it. He laughed, shaking his head. "Guess I'm full of surprises." He turned around, holding the brim of the hat between his fingers. "So what do you think? Be honest. If I look ridiculous, say it." I tilted my head, pretending to appraise him like a fashion critic. "Honestly, it suits you. You've got that whole accidentally charming thing going for you." He raised an eyebrow. Accidentally. Yeah, I said, grinning. Like you didn't mean to pull it off. But you did anyway. He laughed again, softer this time, and for a second it felt like we were standing in the middle of something delicate. He adjusted the tank top again and sighed. Man, I can't believe I'm doing this. I work in accounting. The most daring thing I usually wear is a pattern tie. That's why this will be unforgettable, I said. You're stepping out of the spreadsheet zone into legend status. He shook his head, smiling. Legend status might be pushing it. Then we'll call it character development, I said. That made him laugh harder. You sound like a motivational speaker. I'm a retail worker with a dream, I replied. It's close enough. The laughter faded into a softer quiet, and something about his expression shifted. The nervousness that had defined him earlier was gone. He seemed lighter, easier in his skin, as if the ridiculousness of the costume had peeled away some invisible layer of self-consciousness. Hey, he said after a pause. Thanks for not making fun of me. Most people would have had a field day with this. I get it, I said. Everyone's got something they're scared to look silly doing. But half the time, that's when people are their best selves. He met my eyes, and for a moment, I forgot how to stand still. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. I smiled, breaking the spell before it turned into something I couldn't name. You'll see. Once the music starts, they'll love you. Just remember to breathe. He took a deep breath and exhaled dramatically. Breathe. Got it. Maybe I'll write that on my hand. Just don't forget to dance, I added. Oh no, he said, grinning. That's where I draw the line. We both laughed, and it felt easy again. He turned back toward the mirror, tugging the hem of the tank top down a little. You really think it's fine? Completely, I said. You're ready for the stage, cowboy. He smirked at his reflection. You sure you're not just saying that so I'll stop asking? Maybe, I said, smiling. But I'm also right. For a second, he just looked at himself, then at me, and something passed between us. Not flirtation, not words. Just that quiet recognition of two people who understand what it's like to feel out of place and suddenly not. He nodded once, as if deciding to believe me. Okay, I trust your judgment. Good, I said. That's the first rule of this store. Trust the consultant. He grinned. Is that official policy? It is now. He turned back toward the fitting room. All right. I'll change before I start thinking I can pull this off professionally. Careful, I called after him. You're dangerously close to confidence. He laughed again before disappearing behind the curtain. As he changed, I leaned against the counter near the doorway, listening to the rustle of fabric and the occasional muttered complaint that made me grin. The whole thing was absurd in the best way. This strange intersection of humor, vulnerability, and something that felt almost tender. When he stepped back out in his regular clothes, he looked relieved, a little flushed, but smiling. Okay, verdict. You were right. It wasn't that bad. See? Told you. You just needed a hype person. Well, he said, holding the shopping bag again, you're hired for every future crisis of confidence. Careful, I said. That's a full-time job. He grinned. I'll keep that in mind. He lingered for a moment, like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just gave a small nod and started toward the door. Thanks again, he said, for, not laughing. Anytime, I replied, meaning it. The bell above the door jingled as he left, sunlight spilling briefly across the floor before it closed. I stood there for a moment, the store quiet again, the faint scent of his cologne still hanging in the air. Something about the day felt bigger than it should have, like I'd been handed a glimpse of what it's like to connect with someone without pretense, without armor, without needing to hide. I caught my reflection in the mirror near the fitting room and smiled, shaking my head. Maybe it's not just the store that feels different, I thought. Maybe it's me. He was ready to go. At least that's what I kept telling myself. He stood by the counter again, bag in hand, the same one I'd packed for him twice now. I'd already said goodbye, even smiled, but he wasn't moving. He lingered there like a man waiting for a bus that might never come. I should probably get going, he said at last, though his tone didn't sound convinced. Yeah, I replied, pretending to busy myself with a stack of receipts. Big day ahead. Huh? Time to start rehearsing your dance moves. He chuckled, setting the bag down again. Don't remind me. I actually tried earlier this morning. My neighbor's dog started barking. That's how bad it was. I laughed, and the sound felt natural, easy. He laughed too. That warm, full laugh that had filled the store earlier. Then silence crept back in, not uncomfortable, just waiting. So, how long have you been working here? He asked suddenly, leaning on the counter with casual curiosity. I hesitated, realizing this was my first real conversation since starting. Technically, about 4 hours, I said with a grin. He blinked, then laughed again. Wait, seriously? Yep, first day. And so far, you've been the most memorable customer, though, to be fair, the competition's thin. Glad I could make an impression, he said, smiling. There was a beat, a quiet understanding that this moment didn't need to exist, but somehow did anyway. He looked around the store again, eyes tracing the shelves and displays. It's not what I expected, he said softly. I always thought a place like this would feel different. I don't know, louder? More awkward. It's actually kind of peaceful, I said, resting my hands on the counter. Once you stop looking at what's on the shelves and start noticing the people walking in. He tilted his head, curious. What do you mean? I took a breath, surprised at how easily the words came. Most people who come here aren't chasing something wild. They're chasing comfort, permission to laugh, to explore, to just be themselves for a few minutes without anyone judging them. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. That makes sense. I guess that's what I like about it, I continued. It's honest. No pretending. Everyone walks in carrying some secret, but no one has to hide it once they're here. He looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing that thought. That's rare, he said quietly. Yeah, I murmured. It is. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, but his body language had shifted. Not guarded anymore. Open. Present. Is that why you work here? I hesitated, surprised he'd asked. Partly. I needed the job, sure. But also, I think I wanted to be somewhere that didn't make me feel like I had to edit myself all the time. He frowned slightly, curious but gentle. Edit yourself? Yeah. I smiled wryly. You know how it is, certain jobs, certain crowds, you learn what to say and what not to. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny, agree with things that don't sit right. You build a version of yourself that's easier for other people to accept. He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. Yeah, I get that. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Sorry, didn't mean to get deep on you. Occupational hazard, I guess. Too many quiet mornings. No, he said quickly. It's fine. Honestly, I kind of needed to hear that. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. He shrugged, looking down at his hands. I've been stuck in the same office for years. Everyone's polite, professional, but no one's really there. You start forgetting what it's like to talk about real things. Feels like half your life's just waiting for the weekend. The honesty in his tone surprised me. There was something fragile about it. The way people sound when they let their guard down without meaning to. I know exactly what you mean, I said. You start thinking that's normal, that being invisible is part of the deal. He met my gaze again, and there was no humor this time. Just quiet understanding. But it's not normal, is it? No, I said softly. It's not. For a long moment we stood there in silence. Outside, the hum of distant traffic blended with the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Inside, it felt like the world had shrunk down to the space between us. He ran a hand through his hair again, that nervous habit I'd noticed earlier. You talk about it like you've lived it. I have, I admitted. Still do sometimes. He studied me for a beat. You seem comfortable now. I gave a small laugh. You caught me on a good day. Something flickered across his face. A look I couldn't name. Not pity. Not sympathy. Recognition, maybe. Well, he said after a moment, smiling faintly. If it helps, you make this place feel less intimidating. You've got a calm energy. I laughed. Calm? That's a first. Usually I radiate pure panic. Not today, he said, meeting my eyes. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was something else entirely. An invisible current that hummed between us, quiet but alive. He reached for the bag on the counter, and I did too, our hands brushing. It wasn't much, just the lightest touch, but it felt like a pause in time. We both froze, neither pulling back right away. Then he smiled, small, uncertain, but real. Guess I should actually go this time, he said, voice low. Real or imagined. Something had shifted, subtle, but enough to make the store feel a little brighter, the silence a little softer. I turned toward the window and caught a glimpse of him outside, crossing the street. He glanced back once, just a flicker, and smiled before disappearing into the crowd. The bell over the door jingled again from the breeze, like an echo. I stood there, smiling to myself, heart steadying but lighter than before. Maybe I didn't imagine it. Maybe, for the first time in a long while, someone had actually seen me. And maybe that was enough. The hours after he left moved differently, like time had lost its shape. The bell above the door had gone silent, and the hum of the lights filled the space again, steady and low, like the background note of a song I didn't realize I'd been listening to all day. The store wasn't loud, but it wasn't exactly quiet either. It carried that strange stillness that settles after something meaningful happens, when you can feel the echo of a conversation long after it's over. I stood behind the counter, running my fingertips across the smooth surface where his bag had rested, trying to replay the day in my head. It wasn't just the words we'd said. It was the pauses, the laughter, the warmth in the way he looked at me when I spoke. That look had lingered longer than I wanted to admit. I'd had crushes before, of course. Passing moments. People you imagine possibilities with until reality reminds you not to. But this was different. This wasn't about attraction. Not really. It was about recognition. Like two people who didn't need to perform for once had stumbled into the same room and accidentally told the truth. I leaned back against the counter and laughed quietly to myself. How strange, I thought, to find connection in a place like this, surrounded by neon lights and rows of glossy boxes promising pleasure. Yet here I was, realizing that what I'd actually found was something far simpler, a reminder that I could still feel something honest. Maybe that's what surprised me most. Not the nerves or the humor or even the moment our hands brushed, but the realization that I'd stopped holding my breath around someone. I didn't know how long I stood there, lost in thought. The street outside had grown dimmer, the sunlight fading to that pale amber glow that signals evening's arrival. Shadows stretched across the floor, bending around the displays and shelves. Eventually, routine pulled me back. I grabbed a rag and started cleaning the counter, just to have something to do with my hands. Wiping surfaces, straightening price tags, folding stray packaging. It was mindless, but grounding. Every now and then, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason. When I passed the mirror by the fitting room, I paused. My reflection looked different. Nothing major, just a subtle ease around the eyes, a looseness in my posture. The kind of difference that comes when you've stopped pretending for a while and forgot to start again. I laughed softly under my breath. Get a grip, I muttered. Still, there was something comforting about knowing that a single conversation could shift the tone of a whole day. Maybe of more than a day. I thought about what he'd said before leaving. You make this place feel less intimidating. It wasn't a big statement, but it stuck with me. Maybe because I'd never realized how much I wanted to be that for someone, to make a space feel safe. For so long, I'd been the one walking into rooms trying to make myself smaller, more acceptable. Now, for once, I was the one holding space instead of shrinking inside it. And it felt good. By the time I flipped the open sign to closed, the streetlights had come on outside. The world beyond the glass felt far away. Muted traffic, distant voices, a bus hissing to a stop somewhere down the block. Inside, everything was soft and still, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I gathered the day's receipts, turned off the background music, and began my final walkthrough. The aisles looked calm again, everything back in its proper place. You'd never guess how alive it had felt just hours ago. how laughter had filled this same air, how a stranger had walked in nervous and left smiling. When I reached the counter again, something caught my eye. A small piece of folded paper lay near the register, perfectly square and easy to miss. I frowned, certain it hadn't been there before. I picked it up. The paper was plain, ripped from a receipt pad, maybe. My thumb brushed the faint crease where it had been folded twice, neatly, deliberately. My heart started to beat a little faster as I opened it. The handwriting was clean and careful, leaning slightly to the right. Only one line was written, simple and unadorned. You made me feel comfortable today. Hope to see you again. For a moment, I just stared at it. The words weren't bold or romantic. They were quiet, gentle, even, but something in their simplicity made them heavier than they looked. I read it again, slower this time. You made me feel comfortable. It was such a small phrase, but it meant everything I'd ever wanted someone to say. I lifted the note closer, and that's when I noticed it, the faintest trace of cologne. The same scent that had lingered after he'd left earlier. Clean, fresh, with a hint of something warm beneath it. It was him. A nervous laugh escaped me, half disbelief, half something else I couldn't quite name. I pressed the note flat against the counter, my palm resting over it as if to steady the sudden rush of feeling behind my ribs. Did he leave it on purpose? Or had he dropped it without meaning to? Maybe it was just a kind gesture, a polite thank you for good service. Maybe it meant nothing at all. But maybe it meant exactly what it said. I looked toward the door again, out at the reflection of streetlights flickering on the glass. The city beyond felt distant, almost unreal. In that moment, the store didn't feel like a place of merchandise or transaction anymore. It felt like a witness, like the walls themselves had seen something small but significant happen that day. A laugh, a look, a folded piece of paper. I turned the note over in my hands, smiling despite myself. It was absurd. Really, how something so simple could fill me with such a complicated calm. I didn't know him. I didn't even know his last name. But somehow, the day had left an imprint deeper than any sale, deeper than any flirtation. It wasn't about who he was. It was about what the moment reminded me. That connection doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it slips quietly into your life between a laugh and a goodbye, leaving just enough warmth to make you hope it might return. I folded the note again, carefully along the same lines he had, and slipped it into my pocket. When I finally turned off the lights, the room dimmed into soft silhouettes. The shelves glowed faintly from the streetlights outside, and the silver bell above the door gleamed faintly in the dark. I grabbed my jacket, checked the locks twice, and stepped toward the exit. Before leaving, I looked around once more. The empty aisles, the fitting room curtains slightly askew, the counter where his bag had sat, the faint reflection of myself in the window. A smile tugged at my mouth. Maybe this wasn't just a good first day. Maybe it was the beginning of something I hadn't realized I was ready for. A life that didn't hide from feeling. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the folded paper again. It felt small but solid. Real. As I stepped outside and locked the door behind me, the cool evening air met my face. I breathed it in, slow and deep, the scent of rain in the distance mixing with the faint trace of his cologne still clinging to my fingers. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again, but somehow that didn't feel sad. Felt alive. Maybe some moments weren't meant to lead anywhere. Maybe they were just meant to remind you that you can still be moved. I looked up at the sign above the store, its pink neon glow humming faintly against the night. Then, smiling to myself, I whispered what I'd been thinking all along. Maybe it's not just the store that feels different. And with that, I turned toward home, the folded note warm against my palm, the night carrying just a hint of possibility. The city had started to quiet by the time I locked the door behind me. The soft click of the key echoed down the narrow sidewalk, followed by the gentle hum of the streetlights flickering to life. It was that in-between hour, too late for rush hour, too early for nightlife, when the world felt paused as if holding its breath. I tucked the folded note into my jacket pocket, right where my hand could reach it, and started walking. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. Somewhere a car radio played a song I didn't recognize, its melody drifting and breaking with the wind. Each step seemed to stretch the silence, leaving only the soft rhythm of my shoes against the pavement. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd laughed, light but honest, the kind of laugh that doesn't come easy for most people. About the way his eyes softened when he listened, about how ordinary everything had seemed until it wasn't. It had all happened in the span of a few hours, and yet it felt like a full chapter. Something that would replay in my head every time I passed that counter, every time the bell above the door rang. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the note again, holding it under the glow of a street lamp. The ink was dark and slightly smudged near one corner, maybe from his thumb pressing down as he wrote. The words were simple, almost shy in their honesty. You made me feel comfortable today. Hope to see you again. I ran my finger over the paper, tracing each curve of the letters as if they could tell me more than what was written. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a promise. It was something smaller, an opening. And somehow that made it more powerful. People don't leave notes like that anymore. They send texts, emojis, quick messages that vanish into noise. But this was physical. It existed. It had weight. I could fold it, unfold it, feel it warm in my hand. It was proof that something real had happened today, even if it was brief. As I walked, my thoughts replayed the day like flickering film reels. His nervous grin when he first walked in, the way he stood awkwardly by the door, pretending to study a display of keychains just to delay speaking. Then the laughter, the teasing, the slow easing of both our shoulders as we realized we didn't have to be anyone else in that moment. I smiled to myself, remembering how we'd both tried to fill the silence at first, only to end up enjoying it by the end. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of breath, awareness, and something unnamed. Struck me how rare that was. We spend so much of life running past each other. Eyes on screens, thoughts elsewhere, rushing from one obligation to another. We forget that connection doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes, it's just a shared glance between strangers who understand something unspoken. Maybe that's what today was. Two people, each quietly tired of pretending, meeting by accident in the least likely of places. I turned down a quieter street, the kind with uneven sidewalks and old lampposts that hummed softly. The paper rustled in my hand as I flipped it over again. What had made him write it? Gratitude? Kindness? Curiosity? Or was it something deeper? The same feeling that had tugged at me when our hands brushed across the counter? The question didn't scare me as much as it should have. For so long, I'd been cautious about people, keeping things light, distant, manageable. It was easier that way. But this small note, this unexpected kindness, had shaken something loose in me, a realization that maybe I'd built too many walls out of fear that no one would ever try to see past them. I looked up. The night sky was half covered by clouds, but a few stars had managed to break through. They looked faint, uncertain, still shining anyway. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought. You made me feel comfortable today. It wasn't much, but maybe that's all any of us were trying to do in this world. To make someone else feel a little more at ease, a little less alone. I reached my apartment building, a modest 3-story place above a row of shops. The stairwell smelled faintly of coffee and dust. I climbed slowly, feeling the day in my shoulders, the good kind of tired that comes from doing something that matters, even if you don't realize it at the time. Inside, my apartment greeted me with its familiar clutter. The half-washed mug on the counter, a jacket draped over a chair, an open book waiting on the couch. I turned on the lamp by the window, bathing everything in warm amber light. It was quiet here too, but in a comforting way. I slipped off my jacket and sat at the edge of the bed, pulling the note out again. It looked smaller now, almost fragile against the lamplight. I smoothed it gently across my knee and read it one more time. You made me feel comfortable today. Hope to see you again. The words replayed in my head, softer each time, until they blended with memory. The sound of his laugh, the warmth of his voice, the slight tremor when he'd said goodbye. I set the note on my nightstand beside my alarm clock. For a moment, I just stared at it, the way you stare at something that feels like it might vanish if you look away too long. Then I leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. Was it foolish to hope he'd come back? Maybe. But hope had a strange way of arriving uninvited, quietly, stubbornly. I imagined him walking back into the store, the bell above the door ringing that same soft chime. I'd look up from the counter, pretending to be surprised, and he'd give that half-smile again, pretending it wasn't planned. Maybe he'd say he forgot something. Maybe he'd admit he didn't. Either way, I'd have the chance to say what I hadn't before, that he made the day feel lighter. That sometimes a small act of kindness, a joke, a conversation, a folded piece of paper, can mean more than people realize. The thought made me smile. I lay back on the bed, one arm resting over my eyes. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside, the low roll of traffic, a siren far away, someone laughing down the street. Life kept moving as it always did. But something inside me had slowed down, just enough to notice the space between the noise. In that space there was gratitude. Gratitude for a moment that had reminded me I was still capable of connection. That no matter how much I tried to stay guarded, the world could still surprise me. I turned my head toward the nightstand again. The note caught the light from the lamp, its edges glowing faintly like a promise not yet fulfilled. I reached out, brushing my fingertips over it one last time before turning off the light. The darkness settled around me easily, soft and familiar. My eyes adjusted slowly, catching faint outlines. The curtains swaying in the open window, the glint of the city beyond. I thought about tomorrow, about the bell over the door, about the possibility of hearing it again, that small, ordinary sound that suddenly didn't feel ordinary at all. Maybe he'd come back. Maybe he wouldn't. But either way, I'd be there. Ready, open, a little braver than before. I smiled into the quiet, feeling the weight of the day drift from my shoulders. Maybe tomorrow the bell will ring again, I thought, the words settling like a secret prayer. And maybe this time I'll say what I really want to say.